Designing AR and VR experiences. I have an incredible panel here today, and I'm Maggie Lane. I am a writer, producer, journalist, predominantly virtual reality, and I design things. So sometimes well, sometimes very poorly. I aim for well, though. That's my goal. Okay, let's go down the line. We're going to have people introduce yourself and then talk about one project that you're working on that you're most excited about.
Jake Sally, Director of Immersive Development at Riot, so it's across 360, AR, and VR. We're currently working on a project surrounding American folklore.
Hey, Chris P. My animation studio is Titmouse. We're currently working on Banana's music video for a guy called Brendan Small, who was the creator of Metalocalypse, an adult swim show that we did.
Let's talk about that later. He's my favorite.
Oh, okay.
Like, literally, I'm his biggest fan.
Nice.
Nice. Connections, guys. That's why we're here.
I'm Chet Woods. I work with Lexus, Publicis Group's premier and luxury agency. We build a lot of VR and AR for them right now.
Ilya Roshkov. I am a filmmaker currently in post-production for an action VR film, Agent Emerson, in partnership with Rogue Initiative.
My name is Penka. I'm a freelance composer for music for video games, VR, and film. And my most exciting projects this year were VR, the Mummy game, the VR experience, and a big exhibit, a new exhibit complex for NASA called Heroes and Legends, which is permanently located at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral.
Dope. Okay, let's start from the very beginning. I've heard that's a very good place to start. Okay, so when we're like initially conceptualizing an experience, when we have the blank page, a literal blank page, blank computer screen, what is your process like to conceptualize an experience? What's the first thing? And anyone can answer these questions.
Well, from filmmaking point of view, it all begins with the story. VR is a complicated technology, and nothing is developed yet, and really nobody knows the rules, because there are no rules, only guidelines. So it all starts with a story, and everything else follows to support that. What technology do you need to convey that story? How audience will experience that story? So I'd say it all begins with the story for me.
Begin with a story. Cool.
For us, for me, it's a sketchbook, right? You
Cool.
draw the pictures, and sometimes you do these fancy decks. You use like, PowerPoint or Keynote or Google Slides. But I find you flip through a sketchbook when we do pitches, works so much better. It's so much more intimate to be like.
Is it going to be that small of a book, or do you use a bigger book?
Yeah, no, a real small book.
Cool.
Smaller the better.
Guillermo
Make them
del
come
Toro
in
does
real
that,
close. They gotta look at it like this close to see what's happening.
Side note, because I don't believe in traditional panels. I don't. I'm designing this panel. It's an architecture move. Guillermo del Toro is actually famous for his sketchbooks.
Yeah,
and I
that's
once
true.
opened one, and it was a Pan's Labyrinth one, and it was just red, because it was the moment in the movie where there's just going to be blood everywhere. And it was literally like crayon all through. I'm like, whoa, this is awesome. So yeah, sketchbooks. Ooh, that's a great tip. Okay, keep going, everybody. How do you initially conceptualize a design?
Mine's the same way, pencil and paper first, and then moving into digital.
Cool.
I would say VR for me is a holistic experience, and the most important thing for me would be to, I always work as a collaborator with other collaborators, game developers, designers, so the conversations begin with, again, the concept, the idea, and what do we want the audience to experience as a holistic experience. So combining everything together, all the sensors, sight, hearing, emotions, tactile, so it's a holistic experience.
I think starting from the story is a great jumping off point, and specifically understanding why that story is best told in 360 or VR or AR over any other given medium. Breaking Bad is a fantastic TV show. It's probably not a great movie. It's probably not a great trilogy of movies or a digital show. It really works as a television show. So really making sure the why VR, the why AR, the why 360 is fully thought out before getting, I think, too far into the story, only to find out you've actually made a television show.
In terms of creativity brain state, is there any kind of ritualistic thing, like a cup of green tea, or like whiskey, or is there anything or like maybe meditation? Like, is there any type of ritualistic kind of thing you do to get into a creative zone?
Whiteboard helps. I have my development office, no walls, only whiteboards.
Cool.
And
Wow.
erasing it all and starting at tabula rasa maybe just throwing in some words that come to mind. That's kind of a ritual. And
Cool.
green tea is a good choice.
Green
too.
tea's a good one, yeah.
After you get the bones broken,
Yeah?
we'll sometimes like smoke a Magic J-bone and then
Yeah,
come up
sweet.
with gags.
Incredible.
Dope.
I think music also, music that suits and kind of is in line with what the story is going to be. So I know for American folklore is a lot of Guillermo del Toro playlists.
Cool.
And really having that, there's just like that audio connection really does spur imagination.
Cool.
Oh, thank you so much, Jake. That's so awesome to hear. For me, it's lunches, conceptual meetings. Just I'm a kind of very thoughtful artist in the sense that for me the gestalt is the most important thing, the experience, kind of the totality of the experience. So we begin with that. Lunches, conversations, keywords. I always ask my collaborators to give me music or links or antecedents that inspired them because I need to understand their taste, I need to understand their expectations. And for me, these are really important things because I'm the one who comes at the end and adds the music and audio to the experience. But I would say the conceptual conversations are most important. After the conceptual conversations, there is the moment of total scare and fear and utter hell because then I have to begin translating these ideas into music and notes, and it's not easy, it's never easy. But again, knowing the genre, I'm a huge geek. I just watch a lot of movies, science fiction, read books. I love history, so kind of knowing the genres and knowing what's been done already helps me be an innovative artist, kind of to move forward by looking back.
Yeah, and I do think having those references to kind of having seen what has come before, what does work, what doesn't, where you can say, I think, and most of you would agree in terms of every project you really do want to be looking at how do we push it a little bit further, if that's transitions to perspective, to the interaction, to the type of transportation mechanic that's being used, what's been done so far, how can we build on that? We're kind of in this very nascent state of immersive where you can kind of iterate quickly and you want to try things without it being crucified for your creative choices. There are no standards, so it's great.
That's cool. I'll throw in mine, which is I have a trainer named Hunter, and I see him twice a week because I'm getting really fit, if you guys can notice me, I'm really strong. Anyways, so I will pitch him initially if I have ideas, like while we're working out, and we'll like talk about them. And for me, like getting in my physical body and talking about things first is kind of cool because I'm not thinking too hard and I'm like really focused on something. I'm like, yeah, it's like a sci-fi series and a strong woman and, you know. And so I think getting in our physical form, we can all be very heady. And I think anything that can get you out of that or change your environment or change your sensory perceptions, which sounds like a lot, you know. There's all sorts of ways to change your sensory perceptions. Cool. So what are some of your favorite, I mean, we are only as good as our tools, right? Or a bad artist blames his tools. Is that the thing? Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's talk about how our tools are helping us. So what are some of your favorite design tools that you use?
Human mind.
Ooh.
Because
Great answer.
in the
End of panel. No, yeah, actually like 45 minutes. Okay, cool.
in the land of VR, and I assume AR also, there are a lot of questioned and answered, and just at some point you have to come to conclusion there is no tool to do what you want, but it's doable. So make the tool. Why not? And those tools are being made by a lot of people nowadays, and eventually those tools will be foundation of the ecosystem, which is just not there yet. So don't be afraid to think outside of the box and build your own toolkit if the current toolkit just doesn't work for you. I think that would be my answer.
I'm not just saying this because they are our #1 financier of projects, but Tilt Brush is awesome. We've used it for the last 2 projects we've done, and it's bananas. You know, if you haven't tried Tilt Brush, it is crazy. You have to try it. If you're coming to a VR thing, you gotta try it. It's great.
I use Unity a lot as a foundation just to sketch things with cubes and then jump into a VR environment and see if it feels right or wrong. For like rapid prototyping, it's really easy to just pick up and place a cube somewhere and see how big a room feels once you put a headset on.
Yeah, I guess for myself, there they're our team of designers. I have not one artistic bone in my body, so I defer to, yeah, it's miserable.
Editing's art.
But very good at the development process predominantly.
That's so funny. I would consider you very creative. Oh, you mean like actual, like tactile artist?
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
So, it's sitting down with them, here are the references, let's kind of iterate through a bunch of processes.
Cool. Awesome. I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Jesse Damiani because he has a design piece of toolkit called Galatea, which is reinventing, and they're early right now, but they're basically reinventing the scripting process in VR. So it's a different. If anyone's written in VR, it's always like kind of duct taped together. You have a script, and then you have images. Hey, Evo. Anyways, you have script, you have images, and it can be very duct taped together, and his is a heuristic kind of catch-all for everything. So I really like when people are inventing their own tools. Makes me very happy.
That tool specifically is incredible. I'm
Yeah.
very ready for that to come out.
Jesse, you owe me candy. That was a nice thing to do. Okay, cool. So what design issues are you guys struggling with every day? Like, what are the things you're just constantly struggling with?
From the side of filmmaking, I'd say it always looks different in VR. Every department we worked with, music, we write a piece of music, we write a cue, we sync it up, we put it in VR, feels differently. Production design, same thing, feels and looks differently. Camera development, that was a big thing. We wrote a script, we created a story, and there is no camera which can shoot it. Inventing a camera was a design challenge for sure. But I think it all comes down to taking care of your audience, making it fun and comfortable to them, and check that it looks differently in VR in all of the aspects. Be ready for surprises.
The challenge for us has been comedy, right? Because like VR, great for like horror, gaming, pornos, all this stuff. But comedy is tough because it's like, where are you looking when the punchline is delivered? It's about timing and seeing stuff, and it's like, oh, I was admiring the wall while the character said the joke. So it's tough. We're actually trying to do stuff like character-based rather than story-based, because trying to follow a thread of a linear story is like, well, why do it in VR? And then like if you do a real branchy one, it's like, how can you make them all satisfying and funny? So we're just doing like people hanging out and being funny.
Like who?
Who?
Like,
Do you
comedians?
ask? Comedians, yeah. One of them is your favorite, Brendan Small.
Oh, he's great, yeah.
Another one's Rachel Butera, another awesome.
But Brendan Small's like a
comedian.
real person. He's not just made of cartoon, right?
He's, well,
He's
you
not
know,
like just
we
a
draw
cartoon
half
character
of
that walks.
them.
Yeah. Is he made of cartoon? I like that phrase, actually. We'll use that. So are you saying that in terms of like structuring something in VR, if you take the people that are good at it already and outside of VR, they're naturally going to be good in VR?
I don't know. I'll let you know when this project's finished.
Okay.
I wanted to tell you the story about working on the Mummy VR game. So it's both really exciting and also really terrifying to work in a field that's such a pioneering field. And all we can do is listen to each other very closely and listen to each other's expectations. So what helped me, I was the composer on the game. The studio brought me in. Of course, I signed like a 6-page NDA, but they actually had me play the game in a pretty close prototype, and I had prototypes, just a flat 2D rendition at home to work with in my studio. So what we did, essentially we started down one path, which was, let's make it like the action movie. Let's make it like the Mummy film. Because it's a studio licensed project. The studio licensed the property from Universal. There's a lot of pressure. Universal was breathing down their necks all the time. So they felt compelled to kind of follow suit and make the score like the studio feature film, but it totally didn't work out because it's way too busy. So I spent a week composing like high action music like for a movie. And then they said, well, this is really good and skilled and imaginative, but it's really not working in VR because it's too much. You have to imagine this is an experience where you have the headset and there's a very high fidelity of the visuals, and you also have headphones, and it's 3D audio. And so we abandoned that version altogether, and I started from scratch. And this time I said, well, let's just use tension music, and let's just use tension, sort of horror tension and suspense, but nothing action. So basically you have a game that's a shooter, starts suspense but then turns into a shooter. And that was the right approach. They really loved it. So the point I'm making is this. My job was to listen really closely to my collaborators about what they expected. They also invited me and kind of explained to me how the overall sound was going to work. And of course, music always works together with sound design and ambiences and haptics in the case of VR, because it's a very tactile, very physical experience. It really helped me to go there and play the game. I would not have been able to really do a great job. I mean, I maybe could have, but it was really super helpful to actually play the game and feel the tremors and the haptics and everything, the machine guns and everything else. And what really helped me is I just had to really rely on my intuition and just had to combine all my notions of VR just from having seen VR demos and watched VR games on Steam on a flat computer screen. But that insatiable desire to always learn and see what's out there, that really helped me. It was a happy job. It was not an easy job. But I would say, again, relying on what I knew before, relying on my intuition as an artist, listening really closely to my collaborators and their expectations, and understanding how this is going to work out. This is a location entertainment. It's at the IMAX VR theaters around the country and in some high-end malls like Hollywood and Highland, and that's how they're going to do it, just like, mall experiences, like high-end arcade and theme parks. So that's what helped me.
That's so cool. I've actually played that, so I've heard it, and I've done it. So what makes music tense? What makes music, what we're using in terms of creating that emotion? Like what exactly, like specifically?
The most important approach in this particular game was to understand that the music is going to work together with sound design, with ambiences, and there were two distinctive sections. I mean, the whole game is 10 minutes, so the first 5 minutes is tension. You're inside a helicopter and you're a special, it's called prodigiums. And the whole point is like scoring helicopter is the hardest thing because the helicopter sound has such wide range of frequencies. So what I did is I would avoid these frequencies, but instead work on a really low range or really high range. So that, because, I mean, I've done tons of work in horror and genre. I'm a super geek and I love the genre of fantasy and science fiction. So from having done these projects, I always know how music works and how much music ends up not used because the sound design takes precedence. So I listened really hard to the sound design and avoided the frequencies that were going to step on the music.
Are there any like instruments that you consider like stressful instruments that sound stressful?
Well, this was pretty modern. I would say synthesizers and kind of ambiences and tension pads and a lot of brass pads.
Cool.
I would say brass, just typical tension. But then the second part was just full-on shooting zombies. So then I'm competing. For the first half, I was competing with the helicopter, and for the second half, I'm competing with continuous machine guns. So again, I had to avoid nothing with rhythm, like nothing with jung jung jung, nothing with like rhythmic pattern because the guns have their own rhythmic pattern and I can't compete with that.
That's so interesting.
So it was again all tension pads and ambiences. It was a really cool score. They loved it. They were really, really happy.
It works. So, I just didn't think about you're competing with the game mechanics to do your job.
Yeah.
As opposed to something like Flower where the game mechanic actually makes the sound. Sorry to go off on a tangent, and I just found that really interesting because I've never heard a design process in terms of music scoring for games before. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I like that. Okay, anybody else in terms of, is there any other like secret sauce you guys have? I mean, all of you are experts in your field. Is there anything that you can share in terms of design things about your process that people might not know?
I think for immersive, it's really important to play video games. I spend a lot of time doing that, and it is work related. And I think specifically because there are so many elements of it, even if they aren't going to directly translate into a 360 space necessarily, thinking about how the user is perceiving this experience. One thing that I'm really excited to start playing around with, especially with branching narrative, where you end up with, if it's an hour worth of content, you only really see, 25 minutes of it, is something that's pulled directly from video games, which is you get to the end of the game, you see what percentage of the game is complete. And using something like that in a branching narrative, even live action experience, where you can say at the end of the experience, just down in the corner, you have 40% complete. It ticks something off in the human brain that really makes you want to go back and see more of it. So like, what are the design elements from other mediums that can be applied to the one that you're playing in? The other project that we're doing is like this idea of like, oh, there are in a video game there are 10 levels and you can only see one of them is in color and the other 10 are blacked out because you haven't progressed in the game. Taking something like that and applying it to even just the interface of a series of 360 videos, let's say it's touring different parts of America and you can see like 5 of the states are in color, the rest are grayed out. You know kind of initially what you're handling. You can say put little season 2s in the other states. Again, it's just design thinking pulled from different mediums can be really helpful when thinking about the one you're working in, specifically video games.
Okay, awesome.
One thing we're experimenting with, this is going to sound really dumb as a headline, but then I'll explain it, is magic. Right?
Oh, sweet, okay.
And we have a couple guys at the studio who are like magicians, right? And we're trying to use it to tackle comedy, right? Because of the thing that we're talking about, like the punchline, the surprise, that you have to, be like, whoa, be surprised for the comedy to work. So, there's a lot of devices to get you to look certain places in VR, like a butterfly flying by or an arrow or something. But then you're supposed to look there. So what's the way to get people to look somewhere they don't know that they're supposed to look? Misdirection, which is a magician's technique. The problem is these guys signed an oath that says they can't tell anybody their secrets. So the coders have to become magicians to learn this and take classes at the Magic Castle. But again, I don't know if it's going to work, but it's a theory.
I love it. I mean, I also think immersive theater. I'm a big junkie for immersive theater. And I think that you can definitely pull techniques from there. I mean, immersive theater directors are an ace in the hole, and people aren't noticing that enough, which is they're dealing with the same issues we are now dealing with VR for years. And in Sleep No More in New York, it's like, there's someone running down that hallway. I'm going to follow them. There's a sound. I'm going to follow it. There's a door that's like, it's dark over there, but it's light over there. We're moths. You're going to go towards the light. There's a drawer. Maybe I should open it. I'm curious. So there are all these like tools you can use, and they've been using 360 sound for a very long time. So if there's anything I would say, play video games and also try to do immersive theater, you're going to learn a lot about virtual reality.
I think one of the secret sauce things is a statement from Zen Buddhism about a beginner's mind. It says that in a beginner's mind, there are many solutions, but in an expert's mind, there are few. And right now, regarding virtual reality, we are definitely in beginner's mind. And we should look for a solution all over the place. It draws a lot of things from other mediums which existed, like it definitely has an intimacy of a movie, even more. You can't force a viewer to look at a specific place. You can guide a viewer, but not force him. And that's a difficulty you have in theater, and immersive theater specifically. Sometimes it calls for interactivity, and playing a virtual reality game or watching a virtual reality movie, it's an effort. You have to stand from your sofa, put a helmet on, it's an effort. And it's an interactive effort, so that is from video games. And all of it is a story, and the ways stories are told, it hasn't changed for the last couple of millennia. There is a beginning, middle, and end. There is a character we root for. The language for it is different, and it's undiscovered yet, but keeping the beginner's mind and thinking outside of the box, not trying to follow some rule set which doesn't exist, but experiencing everything as an audience and following guidelines, putting yourself into audience's shoes. I think that's the most important secret sauce, whether it's experience, a game, or a movie.
Okay, so we've talked about VR, and then there's AR, and I guess in terms of design, how are they different? And then maybe more importantly, how are they similar?
Where's the line anymore, right? Like, it's a percentage of the screen we cover up with a digital asset. If that's the marker, is it like at 51%? Is it VR? And AR is like 49 and below. So I think there's like just a really gray area right now as the technology starts progressing moving forward with the introduction of like AR kit and other devices. I don't think those two separate silos will exist much longer.
From the content point of view, I'd say they're drastically different. I mean, there is design side and there is a user experience side. And virtual reality allows you to travel to different worlds, while augmented reality augments our current world. And while those two might share the same dev kits or the same engines, from audience point of view, I doubt that the two, we're close to the moment when the two could be merged. And virtual reality right now is its own thing in its own phase of development, and you can go and buy an Oculus right now, and it's a usable thing. You don't need to be a geek to set it up. You don't need to be a geek to use it. But as far as augmented reality, I'm a geek, and the most geeky thing I did, I downloaded the AR kit and started seeing what's happening. And what's happening, what I saw, it was a ruler, which you can like augment, but it didn't measure accurately. A couple of really, really cool things, but carrying no purpose to them, but they were really fun and cool. It's like one of times when iPhone just came out, everybody I knew had this app where you have like a beer glass on a screen and you tilt it, and you like drink beer or you open a lighter. It was very cool, but it wasn't an optimized usage of multi-touch technology. And I feel VR was there a couple of years ago with nothing but 2,000 roller coasters on the market. And I feel AR has to go through that way too until it becomes usable not only for geeks, but for my grandmother.
I found two uses of AR incredibly powerful and inspiring. One is enterprise, which is industry, and the other is museums. As an artist, I was checking out various museum, again, arcades and installations. There's one particular installation, I would encourage you to check it out. It's this sandbox, physical, actual sand, and then there is a Kinect. Do you guys remember Kinect? So there's a projector that projects an image down, and actually what you do is you scoop the sand up, and as you scoop the sand, there's this image projected on top of it. It changes colors, so you're like reshaping the earth. It's an amazing thing. I mean, I went a couple of times to play because it's a physical thing, it's a tactile game. It's an experience of you playing with the sand, essentially, which is kind of a, transhistorical. Everybody enjoys that. And the projector changes colors. It's really cool. I enjoyed that. That's kind of the kind of thing that students would feel inspired and energized to learn. And also, I've seen a couple of museum pieces that were, again, telling stories or recreating history through AR applications. A lot of AR applications where you hold an iPad, and of course, that's the generation of our children. They just hold an iPad, something, and instantly they begin to play. So I found this to be really inspiring. Now, VR is different for me. I'm most interested in VR in terms of gaming, in terms of storytelling, and one aspect which is outside of the scope of our panel, but I'll just mention it because to me it's absolutely fascinating. It's the use of VR headset in therapy, and more specifically in therapy of neurosis and post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm really super interested in that because I see tremendous potential and it's already been used very widely, and that's just using the headset. So to me, these are the kind of things I just try to read, and they're most fascinating to me, and they're very distinctive from each other. And I also think they're most humanistic, using the new technology and amazing cutting-edge technology to make the world a better place.
In VR, when you have that headset on, you can't see what's going around. So at our studio, it's a very immature thing, but there's been a thing where people run up and kick people in the crotch when they're in the VR headset because you can't see it. You ain't gonna be able to do that in AR.
Yeah.
They'll see you coming.
So the main difference is whether you can kick other people in the crotch. I guess that's the.
Well, and I think it
Without
Someone
them
has a question,
knowing.
yeah.
You mentioned that you saw a museum exhibit at Chain Life. You didn't mention which museum it was.
No, these were demos at a convention. There's a wonderful convention in Santa Clara called AWE, A-W-E. I just went last May and checked things out. But the museum things impressed me the most, and the sand.
Do you know what company did it?
It's just, it's all the name of the presenters.
Okay.
For AR.
Cool.
Yeah, I think design-wise, in terms of VR/360 and AR, is like, again, it just gets back to different stories for different mediums. So really tailoring it specifically to the given story. The way I interact with the headset is on my head versus, augmented reality. You're using this phone as this portal for now until we get to consumer-grade wearables. But really thinking about if I do not believe whatsoever in tabletop AR as a storytelling device. It's just kind of,
it drives me nuts.
it's like, thinking like me looking down at my table and something happening might as well be me just looking at my TV screen and watching it happen. This table is not an interesting place to look. I have long arms. I don't want to hold my phone up this long. So really incentivizing, design for augmented reality is what is the sense of discovery that comes with using the technology? And Pokemon Go is like the cheap example in terms of like it's the low-hanging fruit, but like where are these stories out in the world that you can go find because you have the portal? It's a mobile phone. The point is to be mobile with it, not sedentary. Like using that as a device to get out into the world and say like, oh, like, I'm going to find stories on the street signs. I'm finding stories in different geographic locations that are geotagged episodes of content dependent upon where I'm going. Like that is the design difference for me anyway, in terms of like AR specifically, and then virtual reality. You have the user's attention. They don't have to basically do anything. They can sit, they can stand, they can walk around.
How would you feel about tabletop AR where you can put your phone on this side and see a piece of the story that you couldn't see, or push and pull, so you have the frame into the world where you can seemingly interact and choose your own vantage point?
I'm willing to entertain it. I haven't seen anything that's like blown my mind.
Wingnut looks pretty cool. Wingnut is doing some cool stuff. I don't know if they have that ability yet, but again, it's tabletop. And if you look, I worked for part of that company, and they love playing with toys, and it's like that discovery of I'm playing with action figures, but they're coming to life.
But that experience, I could do that without looking at my table, which is not an interesting setting. I could just have that spinning on my phone. I could be on my laptop scrolling in a virtual world anyway. Again, why that medium? If it's just user scale, like fine, that's a compelling reason, but in general, like I haven't found a compelling story yet. Again, it could happen, it could definitely happen, but I'm more interested in using AR to get out in the world and do something with it.
That's awesome.
At least around your house.
I wanted to strongly agree, and it all comes to user experience, I believe. AR augmenting the world, like, I don't know, I have an arrow showing me where to go to the conference. It's really cool, and it's in the future, maybe in a decade, because the hardware is not there yet. But looking at it through the lens using the phone, if you're playing chess, why don't just get a chessboard? But if it makes a Harry Potter chess when things kill each other out of your existing chessboard, maybe it all comes down to the question you asked early on, why does it have to be VR? Then why does it have to be AR? Why does it have to be AR through the lens of the phone? When this question would be answered and that would be paired together with a story, that could work. There is no limitations. But when you bring things in AR on your phone for the only reason because I can, you shouldn't do that.
Well, I'm like, look, I would the benefit of AR is you can dynamically change the environment, right? If there's a story where I can look at it like this, and it's one story, I turn off the lights in my own house, and now I'm seeing it through, like, I don't know, X-ray vision or seeing it in the dark, and that's giving a different layer of the narrative. Like, fantastic. That's a better use of it already. But, yeah, tabletop, it's just, I don't know.
I wanted to ask a question which I always ask at these panels, and this is the question to the audience, to the panelists, to Maggie. What is the kind of experience that is going to be so defining for VR and so specific to VR that's going to define the whole genre? And I'm focusing mostly on the storytelling aspect. The kind of experience or the kind of story that can only be told in VR and really felt and experienced, something that you cannot tell in a movie or in a TV show. I mean, that's just one question I wanted to kind of pose to the audience as an open question for us to start thinking. What is it, that specific experience that's going to define VR and make it truly, an epitome of our experience today, 21st century?
If you haven't played Super Hot, that's the experience.
Super Hot is so cool.
That's the experience.
What?
Super Hot.
Okay.
Time only moves when you do.
Yeah.
It's genius.
It's one of the most, what's the line? It was one of the most impressive games. What's the thing?
Yeah, it is one of the most impressive games, even if that's not the line.
Genre breaking, no, sorry. There's a joke in the game that you're supposed to use a specific phrase when describing the game. Remember that? It's like,
right.
one of the most remarkable games of the past 10 years. Like, and this is what you will say. And like, people started posting that. I'm like, wow, why is everyone using the same language? It's like the game told you to, or else you can't escape. It's awesome.
I want to bring up two experiences made by Oculus Studio that might be a very blunt answer, but they have a distinct difference. There is Henry, which is basically a sweet Pixar movie utilizing magic to guide your attention, like a little bee in the beginning or light going through so you'd follow it. And it's kind of an adaptation of a movie story to virtual reality. And it's good, it's well done, it's great for its time, and I mean it's very fast developing, because next year we get Dear Angelica, and Dear Angelica is not an adaptation. Dear Angelica cannot just exist outside of VR. They don't adapt the language of the cinema. They create a language of their own, like the size of the object, your proximity to the object, your position in space, and the story is told everywhere. You look left, you look right, you will experience it differently. So there is an evolution of that language, and there is not still there are no rule kit, there are no toolkit yet, but we'll see. And within made evolution of the verse, which I think is incredibly significant for cinema. It's very experimental, it's very different, it's very unique to VR, and it has an homage to Lumiere brothers, the train which comes at you and everybody gets intimidated by it. And I think this is an important piece in history of VR cinema, because it's a film made exclusively for VR and being able to told only in VR. And this is the first one I heard of, the first one I was able to find. And a lot of things were inspired by it. And we're in a different place now. It's been, 2-3 years, but the world is moving fast. And the world of storytelling in VR is moving even faster.
The question that I had that it's actually fitting into this is, how is narrative evolving? And I think that's kind of what we're circling, like sharks. How is narrative evolving? And how is it going to change because of these new, this new medium?
I wouldn't say the narrative is evolving.
I'm going to say unpopular things. I think we have to abandon character-driven narrative in VR because it doesn't work. Because like one person isn't compelling enough to hold anyone's attention. I think we're going to have to abandon the philosophies of like this is the character and this is the story, and go this is like the story of this environment. Like this is the story of this building, and you can decide what you want to do inside that. And there are multiple individuals and characters in that story, but it can't be just about like anyone's character, because you're going to get bored real quick.
But I think what you just said is not abandoning character, it's just the user is the character.
Yeah, essentially, yes. We are our own hero's journey, where we are Joseph Campbell's taking the hero's journey when we go into VR as the first-person perspective.
I think one thing that's going to help evolve that we will push past to a degree is like when you start getting into wearables like biometric feedback, how does that start to affect things like Neurable, where you have brain-machine interface, where you've got, your brain waves are directly impacting the virtual world around you, or, maybe the augmented world around you. That's where it gets out of scripted into kind of like algorithmically evolving worlds based on your direct input. And that's where it gets really, really interesting.
I think so.
Yeah. I wanted to strongly agree with Chad. I would say, though, the narrative isn't evolving, but the way we experience the narrative is evolving. You brought up Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces, and that analyzes the stories which are millennia years old. The way we experience it, whether it's first-person point of view, whether it's God's point of view, whether you are looking from different point of views, one thing remains true, whether it's theater, whether it's VR, whether it's radio or a book. There is a story. It has a hero. The hero is on a journey. It has beginning, middle, and end. But nowhere it's told that you can't be the hero. And nowhere it's told that beginning has to be first, and middle has to be after the beginning, and the end has to be last. All the parts are moving, and you can mix it with the new ways for user to experience the story. But the very definition of the word story hasn't changed since the Poetics of Aristotle. That's what I strongly believe in.
I mean, I think you can break it down, and also that a hero doesn't have to be human. That might seem obvious, but again, like I mentioned, Flower, which is one of my favorite games, and you're a flower, but you're also a god force, and you're a hero, I guess, and you're a plant, but you're more than that. And I think anytime we can kind of subvert that, and by the way, it really wouldn't work as a movie, but it works as a game because you can get in that mindset. So I love when people challenge themselves to think not human and not traditional storytelling, but yeah, there is a hero and there's a beginning, middle, end. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything that breaks that mold?
Well, you don't have to be chronological. There are a lot of stories which are told in reverse.
Like Memento.
Like Memento. But Memento still has beginning, middle, and end. We, as an audience, our user experience is not chronological. But the story itself, there is a beginning, middle, and end. It's chopped up, and it's prepared for us to experience it differently.
Yeah.
And it would be different in VR. But it's all the moving parts, they are there. You can't get rid of it. A lot of people tried, and We don't remember names of most of them throughout a couple of centuries. And if somebody succeeded at breaking this pattern, we would know, we would study that probably.
Yeah?
This system works because we're connecting the audience to the objective of, like, of the assignment. And so, like, the idea is, like, how do you relate to the subjectivity and relate people to the objective that you're trying to get them. And once you capture that, it could be from different directions. It's like the idea that how do you bring them on a journey and make them want to go on that journey.
The question, or more of a exploratory kind of train of thought, is the idea of subjectivity versus objectivity in the medium.
We need to care. That all comes down to that, and there is no answer which will be ultimate for every story. But if taking Henry, very, very plain example, but he's a hedgehog. He's so sweet. He loves hugging different animals. But animals are afraid of him because his skin is scratchy and because he has the needles. Well, if someone in the audience doesn't like Henry as of this moment of this sentence, I'm surprised. He's very relatable. And there are ways, and it comes all to the traditional narrative structure using the tools you can in VR. For example, location is a huge storytelling asset in VR, and you can make you care about a location immediately just by using color, by using magic. Eventually it's about relation to a character, and character doesn't have to be an animated object or a human even. A location can be a character, anything can be a character. It's relating to the character on its journey.
I like the word care more than empathy right now. I think care is really, I'm enjoying that.
I guess we might. I'm going to challenge. I guess just in terms of like, I think we can move past. Challenge. Story might be able to move in an interesting new direction in terms of like, I would say something like Samsara is a film that is still has a story to it, but I wouldn't say it's interpretive in terms of beginning, middle, and end. Like the idea of an open sandbox where the user, like, even if they're creating their own stories,
Let me actually bring you an example which I think answers your question. Oculus Dream Deck. Have you tried it?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is experience when you are standing on the top of a skyscraper. Nothing happens. You are just standing on the top of the skyscraper. No traditional character, no anything, but I showed it to a lot of people because it's kind of a thrill test, and what I see is the same story over and over again. And they are the main character experiencing it. Oh my God, I'm so scared. I look left, I look right. Please take me out of this headset. That's a torture. That's your Act 1. And Act 2. The view is beautiful there. Let me walk there. I'm the character. That's the goal. And the user walks toward the end. And in the end, everybody gets scared, so no, not going to walk there. But most of it make it till the end. I'm there. In the end, it's beautiful. It's Act 3. I'm the character. I experienced this environment. This is a narrative with a very unconventional structure, but you still experience your story in the beginning, middle, and end.
Well, one of the projects we're working on now has no narrative structure, but it's just hanging out with characters. And the first job I had was working on the original Beavis and Butthead, and we kind of patterned this experience after that, where it's like more like when they're watching videos, where it's like you're kind of hanging out in this environment with just two funny characters, and they're your friends, and there's really very minimal interactivity. You're just laughing, hopefully, at the jokes that they're making about what's happening around you.
But like hanging out with dudes is a narrative.
Yeah, but I guess there's not. Well, there's no intended beginning, middle, and end to this thing. You know, I mean, I guess there's you turn it on is the beginning, and you take it off, and that's the end.
Yeah. Yeah?
Great conversation. My question relates to the new Star Wars The Void Secrets of the Empire game, which was announced to be coming out there from Disney, where you play as a group of 4 stormtroopers. So you and 3 buddies are stormtroopers and you're going into the Star Wars Void. I was wondering about your comments on how, we don't know what the story is, other than that, because I saw that was in the press release yesterday. But when you have social interactions with like your friends or 3 strangers who are in this VR environment, how can that impact the storytelling? As there is a broad narrative, and now you actually have 3 people or other people you're doing it with as you're going along, you can kind of make your own. We just finished with other people instead of solo VR with everything is right now.
I think one thing that's really interesting about that is kind of like pulling from other mediums, like the dynamic of things like Dungeons and Dragons, right, or World of Warcraft, where in some cases you are going to go in with a group of your 3 other friends, and it'll be the 4 of you together. You're used to communicating, and then another instance it might be, 2 couples going in that don't know each other. It might be 4 random people, and like in terms of design, really accounting for all of that, and either providing something at the start that allows you to kind of tailor the experience based on the group dynamic, or have something that is general enough that it accounts for all opportunities. Like I think things like pub trivia are a great example, where it's like you don't want everything to be so like everyone has to be a Poindexter. They have to know specific sub countries and or sub I don't know whatever silly thing, molecules. You want some that's like as much on random chance or general pop knowledge as you do something that is specific to textbook smarts, right? Textbook versus street smarts, and like in terms of design, really taking those into account for the diverse range of people that are going to be tackling it.
When I played the Void at the demo thing at their offices in Burbank, I had already done it before in New York, and so other people who were with me had it quite before. So they were after we shot the ghost, I would go to the next level, but they were like checking out and exploring things.
Yeah.
And, looking around and dancing, and I'm like, guys, you gotta get into the ghost. So it added this extra dynamic to the story. The broad story was the same, but like my experience in it was very different depending on who else I was with in the hour.
I mean, I guess immersive theater also answers that, which is the idea of like having a structure and then accounting for possibilities, and then enjoying that improvisation that will occur.
Ability to share experience makes VR human, and that's definitely one of the key developments of the future. Just look at Facebook Spaces. But I think from storytelling point of view, it's incredibly important to think it through, and I'm going to repeat myself again. Think about user experience. If you want people to be able to experience the story together and make it a multiplayer story or multiplayer experience, you don't just take a single player experience and put people in it. You think and see how that influences the story. You see how the roles are shared. And great example would be Star Trek VR, when you're a bridge crew and you interact together, and that's a great way to share the experience and make the story together. Not only experience it together, but create it together. But just putting a couple of people in the same 360 sphere of a video doesn't make it a multiplayer story.
No.
I think especially to the multiplayer effect, like how do you design something that promotes communication? How do you say, if it's Star Trek, there's 6 jobs that need to be done at any given point, but there are only 4 people allowed in the experience, which you have to communicate in order to work together to have everything covered on a consistent basis. So I agree, which is communication, and kind of like that multiplayer experience does bring something extra to it, and designing specifically for that in mind. Like give them problems that cannot be solved with one person. You can't have one person that does everything. It requires everyone pulling on different levers.
Yeah, that seems like escape room kind of philosophy as well. If it's a one-person escape room, that's like a sad, it can happen, but it's really sad. It's like, I don't know anyone.
What are you really trying to escape,
Yeah. It's like, I feel like my apartment is sometimes an escape room. I just have a deadline or something. Anyways, I love talking about other people's projects. So what are some of your favorite projects that are not your own? You cannot say your own. And on the flip side, let's call out things that, what are some design fails? Like, are there any designs you think are just not working right now and we could improve?
I already mentioned projects from within and projects from Oculus Story, which are absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
So I'll stick with Miyubi would be one I want to mention, because it's a big leap of faith from an amazing studio called Felix and Paul. And they took a risk saying we can hold an audience there for 45 minutes. And they proved a big point. You can make a feature film in virtual reality, and it works. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend checking it out. As far as design fails, There is one experience called Invisible, and I'm going to step a little away and say that if you film on a movie camera, if you film a theater performance, it doesn't make it a movie. So if you make a movie on a VR camera, that doesn't make it a VR experience. And that's kind of approach they did, and they proved that point with that.
But I think there are some really interesting components of that one specifically that I found really innovative, like the idea of having a wide shot and simultaneously a close-up in the same space is fascinating. Where you can say there's a giant battle going on or giant fight going on, but you can get a close-up of the antagonist pulling a knife out of their pocket, moving towards the protagonist, and having that give you kind of like multiple streams of information. That idea of like almost picture-in-picture to kind of jam a couple things together. That is really interesting. I think vertical stripe isn't necessarily how I would do it, but that's like an important step forward. And I think for that reason, I liked it. And also it's episodic.
Yeah, well, it's a field of innovation, and where there is design innovation, there will be fails, always. The most important thing is to fail forward, to stand up and walk past it, learn. Because, again, vertical stripe is not necessarily a way to do it, but that's a cool concept. How do you make that concept? How do you make it a unique experience for people? It's just sharing these experiences, learning from each other, and moving this medium forward together.
I wanted to speak about 3 projects which I thought were very unique experientially and also in terms of storytelling. There is a Serbian VR maker, her name is Milica Zev. She did 2 things. One is called Giant and the other is called Tree. So Giant, do you guys know, have you watched them? So Giant basically is the experience, it's a very metaphorical experience of the war in Yugoslavia, where she's a child I shouldn't spoil it for you, you should check it out because it's really viscerally, emotionally very gripping and very memorable. As an artist, my most important goal always is to create a memorable experience that's deeply emotional and also very memorable. So that's one, Milica Zev. And then the other experience, which is also kind of very close to my heart because I'm Eastern European, is a Polish studio did photogrammetry walk through Chernobyl. It's called the Chernobyl experience. It's a VR experience. It was super emotional for me also because Chernobyl by now is like enclosed with this kind of a canopy, steel canopy, so it's really, the whole idea is that they're giving us something which is completely impossible for us to physically experience. It's very emotional, it's like, walking through the wasteland and with a camera, so there's a photographic fidelity. Because the technology is this photogrammetry, 400 cameras, then they stitch the images together. I can't explain it scientifically, but that's what it is. And I thought this was, again, really emotional, very unique, something that can only be accessible to us in this kind of a VR application. And check it out. I highly recommend it.
I like Old Friend. It's a music video by Tyler Hurd. It's a little old. It's like a year and a half old now or something. But that was the first one because I was looking for stuff that had comedy in it, being that was our goal, and that was the first one to kind of crack comedy. It's physical comedy. It's like watching silly dances and stuff. But I thought it was really effective.
I think Tyler Hurd in general, even his very first one, Butts, where people are shooting confetti out of their butt, is...
I did actually try that one first and thought that was awesome. But I thought Old Friend was like the next level of that.
Well, and what's so great about that one, I think, is specifically that was the first instance I had seen of like true directing for VR and like the types of transitions that are being used, these thinking very VR native and really saying like, yes, we can translate a lot like montage, etc., the vernacular of TV film into virtual reality, but what are those terms, what are those transitions, movements that are only native to VR that cannot be used in a traditional 2D format?
I'm gonna say in terms of failure, I love that like fail forward. So sometimes I'll do demos and I could be precious and not say what's not working, but it doesn't help anybody. So, if people ask for your creative feedback, give it, be honest, say what works and what doesn't, because it's the only way we're all gonna learn, and we all have blind spots. So I think just having the openness and honesty of telling people things nicely of ways they could improve is helping our industry as a whole, which is a very small industry right now.
And I think a diversity of perspectives too, specifically for VR, where you're running this issue of like, I don't get motions like at all. So it's very easy for me to say, oh, that was great. Like it's, you know, a running tracking shot that hasn't been stabilized, then have someone else come in and, you know, almost vomit. It's
Yeah,
like,
that's really good too.
that and like, you know, there's different stigmatisms in people's eyes. Like you have to get a really, really wide range to at least attempt to accommodate for as many people as possible.
I think that's smart. Like thinking, so I guess for the last 5 minutes, if there's any questions from anybody here about design. Yep.
Yeah, it's great.
Sorry, I have to repeat the question because of the live stream.
Oh.
Have we tried accounting, and what are our thoughts?
Yeah, Justin's a friend of mine because we're both cartoon guys, and yeah, I think it's great. And what works about that, you know, the thing that he cracked, which was, you know, having that continuous audio chatter of those guys in your ears, it's like, it is like kind of like an escape room in the beginning, and it could be real boring if they didn't have those guys like, look at that drawer, no, look under that, do this, you know, and that was a great way to solve the comedy problem, I think, in that, you know, to approach that issue and solve it.
Yeah, that idea of banter for story development too, I think is huge, which my favorite instance of that is Uncharted, which is a PlayStation game, but really thinking about like the banter you get between the main character and then his brother throughout, it fills in the world consistently over the course of whatever it is, 40-hour gameplay. And that's a really interesting, I totally agree with you in terms of VR is like, it's a great way to get a lot of that information in without having it be directly, you know, like dialogue boxes that you're choosing between.
Although sometimes having a mix, like in Firewatch, you know, sometimes there's banter and sometimes you're controlling. I love the dialogue in that piece. It's so good. But yeah, I think having choice and then not having choice is really fun to play with. Yeah, Kevin?
Yeah, traditional films have three-act story structure. Video games tend to have little levels where you do the levels and then get the boss at the very end. Can we borrow from that for creating VR games? Or do they work or not work? Or is there a new model that we have?
Okay, sorry, I'm supposed to repeat the question. The question is talking about structure, you know, film structure, video game structure, and can we borrow, and is there a new model of structure? Is that right? Great.
Well, I feel that game structure, in terms of the story, not in terms of the level design, the game structure and of the story and the film structure of the story, they're starting to get very similar, and you can see the evolution from Tetris, which has no story, to something which Naughty Dogs or Quantic Dream make, which is a 3-act story. They even screen games at Tribeca by making a cut of it.
Yeah.
So it's a different user experience, but there is still beginning, middle, and end. The tools and the language, how it's told, is different, and there is levels, and there is interactive side in games, and there is the way you access additional story content, like, I don't know, walk and hack the computer and get some emails of bad guy and good guy when they were best friends in the past, whatever. It's additional story content, but the main core of it is still conveyed with the beginning, middle, and end, and the character you root for.
In terms of new formats, I think things like, if anyone's played Everything, it's a game on PlayStation that is awesome. Basically, you just move about the world, but you can zoom in and out, and from kind of like this scale down to the nano scale, down to the subatomic scale, which then is in a Mobius strip format brings you back to the nebula scale. And like, that's a fascinating format for me, where it is just like pretty much experiential, and you can get whatever you want out. You can travel anywhere in the world, but it's about your relationship to different scale.
Shout out to Mosaic, which is a new HBO thing that's coming out. I think it's going to change the world. I really do. Have you guys heard about this?
I mean, let's pump the brakes and change the world.
Okay, come on. I'm such a dreamer. Sorry. I think it really is, though. I think it's really cool. Anytime someone takes the risk in storytelling, I get excited.
They already did it like back in, was it 2004? They had another series that was like multi-platform. It was cool. It was cool.
Yeah, I think we're more ready now. Who knows? Everyone's on their phones anyways. It's nice to bring it to the TV. We're all on our phones anyways, right? Everybody.
I mean, right now.
Everyone's on their phone. I got 1 minute. All right, any other final question? Final question? Yep.
So, one of my favorite experiences in VR has been invading by family. My question is the fact that they've gone the other way, where they've leveraged a purpose-built VR property into traditional film formats. Is that a sellout? Is that a success story? Is it a little bit
basically the question is Invasion, which is now being adapted as a feature film. Is that a sellout? Is that a continuation? What are our feelings about that?
It feels more like a feature film than it does a VR piece. It's a really interesting proof of concept to explore the world of Invasion, but it wasn't one that for me particularly felt very VR native.
Yeah, Invasion is a very nice early VR piece, but just like Henry, it's not really a VR exclusive. They did some nice tricks like eagle, flying, attracting with movement and intention and contrast to light. That's VR, but that's magic also. But the whole story there, it's very close to traditional mediums. So I would say that's a nice step toward VR, but I wouldn't, if I would ask to show an example of brilliant exclusive to VR storytelling, this wouldn't be the one.
Okay.
You know, I agree with Henry and Invasion are two of the examples I was thinking that, like, do the ham-fisted version. That's what I want to try to avoid, you know, because it's like it's very obvious that they're directing your attention.
All right, we are done. We're out of time. Thank you to my panelists. This was dope. And yeah.